2, 1.
Good evening. Thank you for watching. These strange times have brought about unprecedented changes in our lives and the way we work. But the one thing that all of us can agree on is that it has also brought about many opportunities, especially the chance to do some learning and to gain some new perspectives. No greater are these opportunities than for students who are looking out to gain a foothold or an understanding of subjects, topics, processes, and approaches, perspectives, and understanding of the path forward. It is with this in mind that we are bringing you the Objective Students Career Conclave 2020 by HP and Intel in association with Better Photography. This is a conclave where some of the most experienced professionals across industries address students, informing them about their fields, their secrets of success, and about what they actually do. In the sessions ahead, across the next 2 weeks, the Objective Students Career Conclave will be covering a large number and a large variety of topics, and not just about photography, but on everything from writing books to having a great on-screen presence. Just to set the pace for today, we have a very, very interesting speaker, Nitesh Mohanty, who is a visual artist and educator. And just before that, we have a short talk by HP. Once again, thank you for being with us.
Good evening, everyone. First and foremost, good evening, everyone. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for taking out time out of your busy schedule and attending this webinar. I hope you all are doing good and safe. My name is Arjun Sharma, and today I'm going to speak about HP's recently launched
Arjun?
मालूम सर मैं आपको दोबारा डाल रहा हूँ.
Okay, before we move on to our next main speaker, Nitesh Mohanty, please let me introduce from HP, who will be speaking about HP Pavilion series of laptops is Arjun. These are extremely well-designed laptops that fit many requirements. But let me ask Arjun to explain a little bit more about the Pavilion series of laptops.
First and foremost, I want to thank you all for taking out time out of your busy schedule and attending this webinar. I hope you all are doing good and safe. My name is Arjun Sharma, and today I'm going to speak about HP's recently launched Pavilion X360 So let me just make you go through the product. As the name says, X360, HP Pavilion X360 is a convertible machine, which means you can convert the machine, you can use it as a tablet, or else you can use it as a regular notebook. And as the machine goes 360, you get various modes to use your machine. Number one, stand mode, to watch the perfect movie and video conferencing. Tent mode, to play your favorite games and have all your application on your fingertips. Number three, notebook mode and the clamshell mode for your regular use, to do work, to be productive. And lastly, the tablet mode. With the tablet mode, you even have an option to go with a stylus. So instead of typing, simply you can write, and where you have a feature where it converts your writing into text. Even you can edit any of your presentation files, you can edit any of your PDF files. So all those options are there with the Wacom stylus. In a 14-inch display, it's a full HD display with a very narrow bezel design. And the weight of the machine is just 1.5 kg. Believe me, it is a very light, very sleek, and very handy machine to carry. Plus, Pavilion 14 has also gone through a vibration test. So it is a very robust machine in a very beautiful design. And carrying this machine, having this machine with you is like a jewel. Coming to the next most impressive part of Pavilion 14 X360. Pavilion 14 is available with the latest 10th gen processor for fast processing, with the latest DDR4 memory, and the best part of the machine is it supports dual storage. With dual storage, I mean it supports SSD as well as your normal hard disk. You can have SSD for fasten up your booting time, to for shutting up your machine, plus for fast transferring of data. And with a regular hard disk, you can have expandability to your storage. Next, coming to the audio brand which has been used on the machine is Bang& Olufsen. It is a very premium range of audio brand, plus it gives you a very crystal clear sound, and it gives you a very powerful audio experience. And the most importantly, the battery of Pavilion 14. Pavilion 14 has a long life battery, which means you have fast charge. Your battery gonna last for longer period. It charges 0 to 100 in approx 1 hour, and it's gonna last up to 10 hours a day. And lastly but not the least, Pavilion 14 is packed with all your regular ports. So you have two USB 3.1, one USB Type C for your fast transferring of data, one HDMI port is there, then you have one micro SD card slot. Lastly, you even have an option of a SIM card slot, which means instead of carrying a dongle every time, simply you can insert this SIM and you can access the internet. And it supports your 4G LTE, which means you can have a seamless connectivity. You can connect your internet everywhere. So that's all from my side, and would request you to please go and explore Pavilion 14 at HP World Store. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arjun. Our main speaker for today is Nitesh Mohanty. In this webinar, Nitesh will touch upon how one can read a photograph, how art has influenced photography, and how one can create a personal visual diary. Let me tell you a little bit about Nitesh. He has been a design consultant to various brands within retail, fashion, media, publishing, and the hospitality industry. He is a visiting faculty at the School of Media and Culture Studies, TIS and FTII, and currently heads the Crafting Creative Communications program at MICA, that is MICA, where he shares the relationship between art, design, photography, and cinema through a course called Ways of Seeing, along with modules such as Introduction to Photography, Film Appreciation and Storytelling. He has just self-published his first photo book titled Nowhere. Those of you who have logged in using the link and are directly with us on HP's microsite, you can post your questions even as Nitesh is speaking using the Q&A tab. A moderated set of questions will be presented to Nitesh once he completes his presentation. So please do ask your questions while Nitesh is speaking directly on the tab. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nitesh. Well, the stage is yours.
Thank you so Thank you so much, Madhavan. Thank you so much, Better Photography, and everyone at HP and Intel. This is a wonderful opportunity for me to be able to come and share my worldview about what I understand of this very exciting medium that is going through an evolution of its own called photography. And today, largely, I want to touch upon my understanding of what this medium means to me, because I think you might have come across a lot of photographers, and you will come across a lot of photographers in your life. I'm talking to the young ones who are here, who are interested in this medium and perhaps want to shape a career through the medium of photography. But as we understand a medium, we also are trying to understand ourselves. We are trying to understand our world in which we will be practicing through this exciting medium. And say it be art, say it be literature, say it be photography, I think every medium is going through a certain metamorphosis, and it only allows us to pause and question not just the history, but also what the medium holds for us at a very personal level, and if it can shape our professional endeavors, and thus how we can create exciting body of work in this time and in this life that we inhabit. And so today's presentation, I largely wanted to kind of touch upon my understanding of how I see photography as an educator, as a practitioner, someone who looks at photography as a form of expression, as a work of art. And it is largely influenced by my worldview of what I've read about it from the great masters, or how I've seen it from the early birth of the medium to how it has now become such a dynamic form of communication, so that we also have a breed called the Instagrammers, who are photographers who largely operate through that world of Instagram. And this is a very exciting time to be, in spite of being in COVID, because everyone's getting an opportunity to pause and question what do they want to do with life, and hopefully these series of conversations will help you shape that decision. So without a further ado, I would like to begin this presentation, which is titled The Unseen World. And so we all inhabit the world, and we look at it from our own lens, and our lens gets shaped over a period of time. But I largely want to use this platform of the next half an hour to tell you about how I see this world, and how while so much of it is visible, so much of it needs to be unearthed, so much of it needs to be excavated, questioned, inquired upon, and probed to understand what it takes to make a good photograph. And so the question that I want to ask the young listeners here is, what constitutes our world? And if you understand that, you will understand that what constitutes our world shapes our imagination and defines our lens. So I think it's important that we are not just excited about the medium, but we also build in a sense of a conversation with the medium of why I want to photograph, what I want to photograph, what does my world constitutes of, what are my inspirations, what are my influences, how do I see this medium, and how do I see the power of this medium beyond of what I know of it as, because our understanding of certain things can be very limited. So please use this opportunity to ask yourself, what does this mean to you, and how you can define a career or define a path through this medium, which can be extremely exciting. And so to begin with a very rudimentary question, how do we see, how to see? And it might be something very banal or a simple query to the self and to the space that we occupy in this world. But I think it's important to develop a way of seeing, or ways of seeing, because once we do that, we develop a sense of curiosity towards the world that we inhabit. And in doing so, we are able to train our eye to notice things that might be invisible to everybody. Because tomorrow when you go out to the street to make a photograph, everyone has the access to the same street, the same signs, the same symbols, the same traffic, the same chaos, the same madness. How do you see it differently? How do you notice certain things that only you will be able to identify and catch within your lens, while it might be oblivious to everyone else? And I think in doing so, we need to practice an ability to discover what has been overlooked by others. Otherwise, if we look at a city like Bombay, there have been so many photographers, and yet each one of them, from Chirodeep Chaudhary to Anurag Banerjee, they have been able to define what Bombay means to them through a very unique lens of their own. So I think it's important to you develop your ability to see very uniquely, and that's how you want to shape your photography. And to be able to do that, you have to do one very basic thing. And sometimes I ask these questions to my student: what do you think is the most important gift? and they say it's time. And I think it's not time, it's attention. And by paying attention, what happens is it makes you notice things very minutely, and it helps you cultivate your own unique perspective. And in doing so, it helps you develop a distinct point of view of your own. And I want to illustrate this example by showing a very famous photograph. And some of you might have seen this, and some of you perhaps will be interested or excited enough to go and continually interrogate into this image, because this image is perhaps one of the most defining moments in photography, which is called the decisive moment, coined by none other than the great master there, Henri Cartier-Bresson. Now, Cartier-Bresson was just stepping out of his house and going about his life when he got this moment. And you might want to ask, what's so great about this moment, which was made in 1932, and why are we still talking about this photograph in 2020? Now, let me try and illustrate what it means to see. I mean, when Cartier-Bresson was taking this photograph, in a microsecond, he got into a space where he was able to kind of hold a lot of ideas and thoughts and insights into a single moment. So if you just look at it, it seems like just a very ordinary photograph. So what I've tried doing it is dissecting the many things that perhaps one can read into while reading into this photograph. So I have borrowed from the readings and the writings of Cartier-Bresson, and Cartier-Bresson very explicitly says that timing is about saving a disappearing moment and creating that decisive moment. So I think an ability to understand that timing is an essential part of photography is something that you have to imbibe very immediately, because by doing so, you are developing a sense of anticipation. So you very intuitively, you'll be able to kind of be in a certain space and then get a very intuitive feeling that something is about to happen. And that kind of instinctive relationship with the camera is very essential to making photographs. So the moment you start dissecting this photograph, that when you see details like lines, like forms, there's reflection, there is a sense of rhythm in the image, there is a great sense of geometry. I think Cartier-Bresson always wanted to become a painter, and he was studying to become a cubist, and he was largely influenced by the idea of time and how it's held by surrealist painters. So I think there is something very rhythmic as a surrealistic painting, and if you see the play of geometry, it's very cubist in nature. So what Cartier-Bresson has been able to tell us through this image, that the camera is not just an instrument to hold photographs, it's an instrument of intuition and spontaneity. And that enables us to hold moments and freeze it. And in doing so, he's evaluating everything that is in front of him, and he's been able to hold this moment very interestingly with a sense of joy de vivre, a spirit of life. And I can go on talking about this image, but I think what I would largely leave you with is try looking into this image and seeing why it is so timeless, why it is so memorable. You know, why, if you spot and notice that little poster on the wall where you see that ballet dancer dancing towards, on one side, you see the other man trying to run across the puddle, and how he could have just ruined or lost the moment when that foot have stepped onto that puddle of water. But in that microsecond, he's been able to hold all of this together. So I think that's what we are aiming to do. And I think there are great photographers today like Swaraj Ghosh and so many of them who are able to kind of inculcate this very scientific and a very artistic way of looking at their worlds and creating such marvelous images. And I think that's what is going to help us understand this world. And I want to kind of take it ahead by sharing this very interesting quote from an American installation artist called Robert Irwin. I think seeing is forgetting the name of things one sees. I'm sure when Cartier-Bresson was seeing all that unfold in front of him, he didn't know it was a railway station. He didn't know there was a man, wanting to go about his day. I think he just gave into the moment in a very intuitive way. So I think great work of art, great work of poetry, great work of cinema makes us forget what we are seeing, because what we do is we bring ourselves into it. We bring ourselves into that moment. That makes us forget what we are seeing, what we are engaging with. And I want to kind of make you look at Robert Irwin's work. Robert Irwin was wanting to become an abstract expressionist, and then he wanted to paint, but at some point of time he found the medium of painting extremely limiting. So everything that a painting or a photograph sets out to do, Robert Irwin does with these very site specific installation art that he does with light, with geometry, with space, with time, and with color. So he's engaging with the similar attributes like harmony, like balance, like rhythm, like composition, like a certain layout, but he's doing it in a completely different medium. And I think what I would like you to do is make these very interconnected understanding that artists and filmmakers and poets and photographers have, and that ability to see the world not just in a very singular way but in a very multifaceted way will make you understand how exciting this medium can be. And so what you need to do in that process is train your eye. And when I say train your eye, you need to understand that you need to contemplate, because in the world that we are living in, and we are being bombarded with so many images and so many ideas, we immediately get enamored by what we see. But the details, the orders, the form, the meaning, the context, the relationship of all of this take time to perceive. So I think we must inculcate a habit of seeing extremely slowly. And what I mean by seeing slowly is I want to illustrate that by showing you this example of a drip painting by Jackson Pollock. Jackson Pollock was an American abstract expressionist, and this drip painting is called Autumn Rhythm number 30. It was primarily one of the very defining works of Jackson Pollock in his early years, when he had discovered that idea of spilling paint on canvas and creating art. Now, if you generally walk into MoMA and look at this painting, you will see lots of drips, but if you see it slowly, you will see forms. I think there are a lot of analysis that has happened about this painting, where people have seen horses marching out, people have seen army, people have seen faces, people have seen different kind of forms emerging out of it. Now, this kind of a training to slow your eyes and look at your surrounding only helps you understand the relationship that you could build with the world. And without that relationship, you will be just photographing for the sake of photography. And I think it is essential that we engage in a different kind of seeing the world that we inhabit to be able to kind of develop this idea. And I want to kind of quote a very interesting thought that John Berger, who has had a very lasting impression on me and everything that I go out and teach. He says the relationship between what we see and what we know is never settled. Each evening we see the sun set. We know that the earth is turning away from it, yet the knowledge, the explanation never quite fits the sight. Now, every time I have gone back to this quote, it has made me wonder how John Berger has been able to kind of encapsulate our relationship with sight, our relationship with what we see and what we understand or what we are seeing, because it needs to be continually interrogated. It needs to be continually revisited, and perhaps one needs to make sense of what I was seeing yesterday and what I'm seeing today and how it has changed, because the world has changed, because the earth has turned, and there are certain things that have happened in my life and in the world that has affected and impacted that scene. To kind of take this further, I want to make you understand that that ability of seeing doesn't come isolated through just seeing. I think what John Berger is trying to say, that to understand this world better, you need to also understand um, how you read this world, and by doing so, I want to kind of share this very interesting um, line by Dayanita Singh. And I think Dayanita Singh has had a lasting impression on a whole lot of young photographers today, not because of just how she photographs and how she understands her photographic world and her subjects, but also through an understanding of how she brings in literature into the ability to be able to see images and before you become a photographer. So I think there's a very interesting interview of Dayanita Singh in Hyperallergic, in which she talks about how when young students come to her and they say, we want to study photography, she says, no, first go ahead, study literature. I think it is important that you empathize with the world, and there's no better way to empathize with the world than through the world of literature, because what it does is it opens windows and worlds of stories, of people, of lives, and then we are able to then identify ourselves in context of those stories and those lives. And the more you try and read, I think you develop a anthropological way of understanding photography through people, rather than just the visual aura, the visual awe that photography brings along. So I want to kind of touch upon 4 books that have helped me develop a certain eye for photography. And I think I highly recommend this to all the young readers out there and all the young photographers out there, because when you read each of these books, Letters to a Young Poet by Renier Maria Rilke, and In the Praise of Shadows by Tanizaki, The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje, and Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino, you will understand how they're able to use their understanding as writers to be able to visualize the world that they are showcasing. And I think that kind of a visualization cannot come isolated in your pursuit of photography without an immersion in literature. I think the more you read different authors who are being able to vividly present a very photographic way of the world that they inhabit, the emotions that they are experiencing, I think you'll be able to realize that the world of photography and the world of literature are not two separate planets. They are constantly colliding, and you'll have to inculcate that habit to be able to kind of feed one into the other. So because tomorrow when you go out and create your own photographs, you'll also be able to articulate what you are photographing. And that's why it's essential to be a reader. And I think this example cannot be personified better than someone like Alex Webb. So Alex Webb was extremely interested in photography, but what he did is he went and studied literature in Harvard. And by doing so, he developed a sense of understanding of the world of photography that he was so excited and enamored by. But he also used his understanding and his education of literature to feed into that world. So when Alex says images should convey as much about the photographer's inner landscapes as they do about the exterior world, to monitor our surroundings is to focus on what's outside of ourselves, what we see, hear, smell, and perhaps even taste. But sometimes what marks a place is something less specific. It's a feeling within us. I think photography constitutes of 2 worlds, your inner landscape and your exterior world. And every time you create an image, both are having a conversation with each other. And you should be able to realize this. You should be able to be aware of this, that you don't create images in isolation. You're always creating images, you're always creating art in context of the other. And the other can be the street, the other can be a documentary subject, the other can be your mother who you're photographing through portraits, the other can be the war-torn scene that Robert Capa went into and photographed. So the other is essential as much as you are. So I think it's important that you understand these 2 worlds while creating images. So I want to illustrate what Alex Webb meant by showing some of his photographs, because his photographic work is so colorful, is so rich, is so vivid, and it has come because he's constantly being traveling into the different remote corners of the world and trying to understand different culture, trying to understand the mannerisms. So he's not just a social documentarian, he's also a street photographer. He's also someone who's extremely poetic in his understanding of what an image constitutes. And I think all of this comes from his ability to be able to read into lives, read into people, read into their worlds before he photographs them. So this is a photograph which he shot in Cuba. And I think you can see the chaos he's being able to create, and he's still retaining all those exciting attributes of mid-ground, foreground, background, compositions, lines, and geometry, and planes, and colors, and shadows. So I think in spite of being so technically sound, he's being able to create this very poetic image. And as you see more of Alex Webb's images, you see there is a sense of drama. There is a sense of theatrical aspect that he brings into his images, and almost like, in a very quiet way, he's created this a street scene in Dallas, Texas, which almost makes us feel that this is installation art. This is not a these are not people who are going about their lives, but Alex has been able to kind of place them in the surroundings to be able to hold this very beautiful image. And again, you see the sense of geometry that he has. I think what we are largely trying to understand here is nothing is in isolation. Photograph is not just about great moments. It's also about a sense of space. It's about understanding who these people are and how they are inhabiting the world that they are in. And I think that's how you're able to kind of bring in everything together, not just in a very singular pursuit of making a great photograph, but trying to immerse yourself in different worlds, in different situations. This photograph is from Greece, from which features in his book called The Suffering of Light. And I think it's, I can go on talking about Alex Webb endlessly, but I think I just want to introduce this world to you so that you get a way of understanding what Alex is trying to tell us. What is Alex trying to show us? How is Alex inviting us to read into his images through whatever is photographed? Now, this is perhaps one of my most favorite photographs of Alex Webb, and every time I show this image of Istanbul, I ask my students to look into the image and tell how many human beings do you see within the frame. And I think from one of the interviews that I was listening, and it was a podcast with Richard Dawkins, I think the cinematographer that Alex Webb spoke, that he shot around 6 to 7 rolls before he found this moment. So I think it is also about a sense of obsession, wanting to get that moment and nothing else. So he also is someone who doesn't compromises. So I think that kind of obsession in your art and your creation is also something that we can learn very beautifully from Alex Webb. And this is one of the photographs shot in Madrid, and also it reminds you of the classical, compositions that Cartier-Bresson was able to create in the 30s and in the 40s, and how Alex Webb is able to do that as beautifully. Only it becomes more magical and exciting with color. And you see the dabs of green, you see the dabs of pink. It's almost like in a very painterly way, he's stepping into these worlds and he's creating these moments just very intimately for himself. So I would invite you to kind of engage with the work of Alex Webb to understand how he's been able to understand all that I'm trying to explain and put out there for you. But if you, so what I did to kind of break this down a little further for you all, I wanted to kind of touch upon everything that Alex Webb creates when he catches a moment or when he creates his photograph. So if you see the words in the center, like a sense of reverie, his images are very elusive. There is something very cinematic, and he goes about it very intuitively. There is something very symbolic, suggestive. There is sometimes irony, sometimes drama. There is a sense of serendipity in his images. His images sometimes turn out to be very idiosyncratic, playful, perceptive, metaphorical, accident. So the center bit is all the emotions that his images are holding. And if you see the words around it, which is light, time, space, foreground, midground, shadows, reflections, form, architecture, it just allows us to understand that he is negotiating from the technical aspect to the emotional aspect. So all the words around are his technical understanding of where he is and what the world constitutes of and what he wants to photograph, and what is the words in the center signify what he's trying to make out of that technical understanding. So I think if you dissect and read into every photographer that you're fascinated by, every image that you see, that why do I like this image, what this image offers to me, I think you'll be going about it in a very non-photographic way, because photographers are largely supposed to be in the lure of the visual. But I think there is a more deeper reading that can be made into images for you to see how enriching that world can become for you. So when you look at Alex Webb's photography, it reminded me of this very interesting writer that I follow, and everyone who wants to become a street photographer, because street photography would require you of lots of walking and walking and walking. Please read A History of Walking Wanderlust by Rebecca Solnit, who says, the magic of the street is the mingling of errand and epiphany. And I think it's such a beautiful way to explain what the street means to you, what the street constitutes. And Rebecca Solnit is with this line, encapsulates what Alex Webb does through his photography. So this is what I meant by making connections between readers and photographers, and see how magical this whole relationship can become. And so moving on, I also want to touch upon how art influences photography, because I think we see a lot of art that how it translates into cinema. But I think at some point of time, few years back, when I was very carefully studying the work of this American photographer Saul Leiter, who along with Diane Arbus and Robert Franks was part of the New York School of Photographers. Saul's work has been one of the most influencing factor in my photography, the way he shoots reflections, the way he shoots color. And while looking at Saul Leiter's work, suddenly I was trying to probe into that is why there is something so painterly about his photographs. And then I started reading about Saul, and Saul very early, young on, wanted to become a painter. He was actually studying to be a rabbi, but he was not so inclined. So he came to New York wanting to become an abstract expressionist, and he stumbled upon these works of Mark Rothko and Jackson Pollock and de Kooning, and I think he was enamored by that world. But at some point of time, he perhaps realized that photography is not, painting is something that he's not so into, because he had a conversation with Eugene Smith, who guided him into the world of photography. But I think there was a painter inside him waiting to come out all the time. And so what I did is I started looking at Saul's paintings, and what you see is on the left is Saul's photographs, and on the right you see a painting by the abstract expressionist called William de Kooning. Now, when you see Kooning's paintings and Saul's photographs, you see there is uncanny resemblance about how colors are played upon, how there's a certain sense of stroke, how there's a certain sense of poetic whiplash that is happening on the screen. And Saul is quietly holding a rainy evening in New York, and William de Kooning is also painting at the similar point of time, and how their work actually then kind of resembles one another. This is another photograph of Saul and another painting of de Kooning. And again, you see there is a very strange similarity of strokes and how the reflection upon a glass with the raindrops or the frost or whatever that is that's creating that painterly kind of imagery in Saul's photograph is already being exhibited by de Kooning. So I think what I'm trying to largely, there's another painting by de Kooning and another photograph of Saul, which have almost like this echo kind of a feeling there, almost as if they're talking to each other, not very directly in terms of exact colors and exact placement, but I'm just talking about the overall mood, the feeling that both the artists and the photographers are able to evoke. And then I studied further on to understand there's another painter of the similar time called Joan Mitchell. And if you see Joan Mitchell's work on the right and Saul Leiter's photograph on the left, they also have a very similar, imitation. There's almost like a reflection, the painter looking at the photographer or the photographer looking at the painter. I don't know if these people ever met and had a conversation, but I guess largely they were investigating the same ideas of emotions and how emotions can be brought about through images and through art and through painting. And by doing so, they were able to kind of inhabit the same world. But what I'm largely trying to point out is if something that is you want to create, like I know a lot of students who come from the background of architecture, from fashion, and they go on to make brilliant images later. There is a sense of who they are and who they wanted to be in their images. So I think it's all right if you're not able to kind of pursue a very direct career in photography, but whatever you're doing, whatever constitutes of your world, if it's constantly feeding into that passion of photography, you'll never be able to leave that out. So it will have its influence. So what if Saul Leiter didn't become a painter of sorts? His images were painterly because he was so influenced by the paintings of that time and the artists who he was surrounded with. And so I want to kind of leave you with this thought, because I want you to also investigate, are there other photographers whose images look of a certain time and borrowed from a certain period of art, because that can be a very fascinating understanding of how art has been influencing photography and cinema and so forth. And that just kind of makes this whole reading much richer than just looking at an image in isolation. I want to leave you with these three quotes, which are very interesting, but which kind of sums up everything that I was talking about. So Saul Leader says, I learned to see what others do not see and to react to situations differently. Saul Leader was there in that New York street where other photographers like Ern Haas was also there. But I think Haas's way of looking at New York was so different. And so I think the ability to be able to see what others are not being able to see and react to those situations is what made Saul's work so distinctly different from every other photographer of that period of time. And William de Kooning, the artist who I was talking about earlier, says, I'm influenced by everybody, but every time I put my hands in my pockets, I find someone else's fingers there. I think it's again taking away from, we might be surrounded by a lot of artists, a lot of photographers, a lot of filmmakers, but I think we must be able to kind of find our own ways of reaching out and touching things. That is essential to our practice. And the last is I carry my landscape around me. That's Joan Mitchell, the second artist who I was comparing Saul's work with. Now, you could be anywhere. You could be in India. You could be anywhere in the world, in Havana, in Greece, wherever you are, or you could be in the confines of your home. But you carry your landscape around you. You no matter, and I'm talking about the landscape of feelings. I'm not talking about the physical landscape. The physical landscape is always there for you to be inspired of. But I think what you need to be carrying and be aware of is the landscape of feelings, your inner landscape that Jean Michel brings out continuously onto the canvases. So I want to leave you with the bibliography. So while I was making this presentation, I was borrowing and I was reading from a lot of books that I had access to. I think it's essential that we read as photographers, as educators, artists, filmmakers. We read, we develop a way of understanding these worlds, which I was largely trying to imply on. And I hope that these books from Ways of Seeing by Berger, The Mind's Eye by Cartier-Bresson, The Art of Noticing by Rob Walker, Seeing Slowly by Michael Findlay, and Seeing Things by Joel Mirowitz. Again, he's a great photographer. You should see Joel's work. And On Street Photography and Poetic Image by Alex Webb and Rebecca Norris Webb. And there is much more. These were just the references that I reached out to while building this presentation for you all. I hope you will go back to these books and understand how rich they are and how they can help you develop a certain artistic vocabulary for yourselves. And that's about it. With that, I want to end this session. And I hope that this was insightful, this was meaningful, and you can use this to develop an eye of your own, develop a sense of the world that you are a part of and how you can engage with that world with a medium called photography. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nitesh. That was a very potent presentation. The reason why I'm using the word potent is because you have introduced so many thoughts and so many ideas into and crammed them into such a short time. For those who are wanting to watch Nitesh's presentation again, they will be available on the website on HP's microsite. So please do visit and watch it again. They will be available for a few months so that you can review and take notes if need be. Thank you so much, Nitesh. We have a Q&A session that follows immediately. We have a few questions that have already come up. So the Q&A session. I think that there is a quintessential question that will come up for every speaker, and I think we should get to that first. And it's the maximum number of questions that people have asked. It is about careers in photography today. Yeah. In today's world, and since you're into education and you're a teacher, what would be the kind of careers available to students on photography in terms of pursuing photography?
Yeah, so there is a direct answer that you have to jump into the world of photography and start assisting someone. Like I think a lot is about learning from who are already there and who have already established themselves as names, and if they allow you to be an apprentice and be under their shadows and work along with them, I think that's a great way to begin learning, because you cannot step. So you have to understand that, when you want to aspire to become a doctor, you spend as many years in educating yourself to become a doctor. You do a bachelor's, then you do a master's, then you do a specialization, and then you become someone who is confident enough to hold a knife and do a surgery. So I think you have to look at photography as much as
Oh,
seriousness.
I'm sorry, Nitesh. Can we switch the feed to Nitesh's view, please? Yeah.
Yeah.
Please continue.
Yeah, so I think as much as we give the education importance, if you're someone's aspiring to be a surgeon, the amount of time and money and the years that a person puts while wanting to become a surgeon before he or she becomes a very confident surgeon, you have to look at photography as a very similar serious profession. So you should be able to invest in educating yourself either through an institute or working with a great master and learning under him or her and understanding what this world means to you, to be able to kind of also know that, is this something that just fascinates me, or I want to do this for life? And when you do that, you could be posed with many challenges. One could be economical, because you will have to arrive at being a name before people offer the commissions and the projects to them. So I think first is education. You study from a school or an institute that offers you that formidable education, and then from there on, try working with someone where you understand the real world experiences. And once you've added these two, either then you can jump into starting your own practice as a freelance photographer, or you can also do something. You can do what you love doing, and you can do photography on the side. I think I know a whole lot of photographers who do that, who work in advertising agencies, or who are into their own enterprises and have been passionately carrying the camera along, because that's where the soul lies. So I think there are different ways of looking at developing a career for yourselves. But I think two things that are completely essential is a formal education, which I think gives you an understanding of the history, the medium, the different tools and the techniques. And one is, I mean, I have a lot of respect for autodidacts. I didn't go to a school of photography. I think in NID, photography was just a 1 week module, but I think it's your love and passion for hold, and then you build upon it. So I think, yeah, and you'll have a lot of other speakers also who will guide you into that direction. Yeah.
Right. In fact, I think that from the time, from let's say 20 years ago, there are a lot more schools of photography available today. There are a
Yes.
lot more institutions teaching photography. So to
Yeah.
begin with, what is the kind of a course on photography that one should actually go for?
I think there would be a beginner's course which allows you to understand the world that you're interested in. I think when I say that there is a semiotic aspect of photography, there is a historical aspect of photography, there's a technical aspect of photography, there is a literary aspect of photography when you read Suzanne Sontag and Berger and Roland Barthes. And I think so. I think a course, any basic introductory course that opens up the world of photography to you in as many ways as possible is something one should be aspiring to look in. And it can't be just technical know-how. It can't just be about the aperture or shutter speed, or it can't be about a certain lens. I think you need to develop a very 360-degree understanding. And I think any course or any institute that offers you a very rich immersion into all the aspects of the camera as a medium, an artistic medium or a journalistic medium, I think that is something that I would suggest students to look into.
I completely agree with you there. In fact, it reminds me again of the that part of your course of your talk, which mentioned the Anita Singh's quote, about books
Yes.
and how you become empathetic when you actually read books, because you imagine, you put yourself into the protagonist's shoes,
Absolutely.
So it becomes a very important part of it. So even reading books would be very, very important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry. Coming back to certain words that you've used in your presentation, you used the word curiosity.
Yeah.
You've mentioned obvious and therefore invisible to
Yes.
others. That's a
Yeah.
statement that you made.
Yeah.
So regarding that, I want to ask you, what would be more important? Do you think that the muse is more important than the camera, or even skill with the camera?
I think the muse supersedes the camera. I mean, the camera is just a tool. So if you call it the muse, the subject, the surrounding, the realm that you occupy, you need to be completely bare and authentic with that in terms of a relationship. Otherwise, you'll constantly remain an outsider, and the camera will look like a weapon rather than a tool through which you're trying to build a relationship. I think a camera allows us to speak to another human being, and I don't know how many photographers look at the camera as a tool of speaking rather than a tool of capturing or holding. So if the camera can allow me to have a conversation with you, which can be very authentic, which can be very revealing, which can be very compassionate and empathetic, I think we'll be able to create far more authentic and honest images. I think for me, camera is always secondary. Your understanding of the world, the news, the subject, the surrounding is primary, is essential. So I think I would rather expect students to read about the place that they will be traveling to rather than worry about which camera I will carry to a certain place. I think if you read about that place, you'll obviously be able to make better images through whatever
Right,
camera that you use. Yeah.
right. To feel more about the place, to feel it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I have one last question. We have time for one last
Yeah,
question, so I'm going to make it a bit of a combined question
yeah,
because you use other words. You've used words like intuition
yeah,
and practice.
yeah,
So there's a process for that practice, and then there is practice and spontaneity. Okay,
yeah,
so it's intuition versus practice and practice versus spontaneity.
yeah.
You've also used, of course, this is a word that came from one of the authors, one of the quotes. I'm not being able to remember who quoted this, but the word is epiphany.
Yes.
Epiphany. And there is something that I remember reading from the last issue. I mean, one of the authors in the last issue had mentioned that happy accidents will happen if you are devoted to your God, which is photography. And this was Mukesh Parpani who actually mentioned this. If you're
Yes.
devoted so much, happy accidents will happen.
Yeah.
So is it practice? Is it intuition? Epiphany? Because of that practice, what would you put first? What would you say is the most important?
So I don't know if is there anything that qualifies to be the first. I think having a strong sense of intuition is a given. Today, if you want to become an artist, if you want to be a creative individual, forget an artist or a photographer. Anyone who's aspiring a creative career has to be intuitive because you're drawing from your heart, you're drawing from your gut, you're drawing from a certain feeling, and that cannot be compromised with anything else that is around. So I think one must learn to develop a sense of intuition about what one feels, how one perceives the world and the surrounding. And that should become a practice of its own. I mean, how do you constantly now I went about choosing these photographers and writers and artists very intuitively for this presentation. Of course, you can say, oh, but Nitesh, you can blame those on the gray hair. But I think it doesn't just come roundabout. It just, you have to be continuously be practicing in that practice of how do I become more intuitive to the world that I occupy. And in doing so, you are giving birth to epiphanies. Now, what are epiphanies? I think our ability to allow accept uncertainty or to react to stuff which is beyond us is epiphanies. I think today more than ever the world has become so volatile and unpredictable, and we cannot be rigid anymore. We have to allow great accidents to happen, and from those accidents we have to create art and photography. So we have to be as open as possible as artists, as creative people, as photographers, filmmakers, so that we can allow things to happen, and those things that are unfolding in our realm then become magical when they are looked in hindsight. But that allowing for things to unfold is essential to any artistic endeavor.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Thank you so much, Nitesh. It has been a very, very enlightening talk with you. It has been something which, which I'm going to remember for a while, and I'm going to go back and relook at this talk once it's available online. It is available anyway on Facebook Live in Better Photography and with HP, and it is also on HP's microsite. So those of you who would like to review, please go to the microsite, HP's microsite, and view this.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. That was an extremely exciting talk by Nitesh. I found that he had packed so much of content into one presentation, because if you actually break it down, if you take a look at exactly what Nitesh had said in various aspects and various slides, not just the slides but various aspects of the presentation, it can be broken down into about 8 or 10 different very, very significant parts, significant aspects. And that would be my recommendation, to go and review Nitesh's talk again. Thank you so much, Nitesh. That was very enlightening. Well, the conclave will continue with several other eminent speakers in the following 2 weeks. So please stay tuned in. Tomorrow, starting on 21st August, starting at 5 p.m., the same time as today, we have the legendary Shantanu Chevre, who will be speaking. Shantanu is the dean of one school of Goa, but in his previous avatar, he was one of the most legendary photographers when it comes to advertising and commercial photography. So this concludes our very first session of the Objective Students Education Conclave 2020 by HP and Intel in association with Better Photography. Thank you all for watching, and have a great evening ahead.